Green Party. Mr. Speaker.
I call the honourable member Tim Grosser.
Well, no, it is not. Mr. Speaker, it's a great pleasure to get up in the first parliamentary debate to support the Prime Minister's statement, to support this government. I think we feel very excited about this year. We see new opportunities. We welcome some new faces into the Parliament from different parties. And I think we feel that New Zealand is in a very good space. And I guess it starts with framing the debate for the funding of this year. So what we have is the Prime Minister's statement, I'll come to that, and the response of Mr Cunliffe, the Leader of the Opposition. And I want to start with the opening accusation of Mr Cunliffe when he said that the Prime Minister is, quote, out of touch. Well, I think it's a very interesting charge, and I think it's the right question, but it does beg the question, who is out of touch? So let's look at this through the framework, not of the whole gamut of the Prime Minister's statement. I'm not going to go into the extraordinary progress we've made in, for example, reducing the crime rate, making people and New Zealanders feel safe in their homes. I'll stick to the broader economic framework. And contrary to what Mr Robertson has just said, the other Mr Robertson, Mr Speaker, of course, about rockstar economy, it's not our phrase. As the Minister of Finance has made it out, it's somebody else's phrase. It's a bit of an exaggeration, except perhaps in relation to looking at other developed economies, some of which would indeed probably put that phrase if they were in a position to enjoy statistics like we're enjoying in this country. But let's use the rather more sober statement of the Chief Economist of the New Zealand Treasury to the Select Committee on Finance and Expenditure just 2 or 3 days ago, when he said, quote, "It is no secret that New Zealand is in an enviable position." Then we got the Moody's annual update about New Zealand to their investors, and incredibly positive statement based on what they said were 4 factors. And they were New Zealand's economic strength, they gave it a high plus. Institutional strength of this country, they graded it very high plus. Fiscal strength, very high. And then the last of the 4 is interesting, susceptibility to event risk as low. Well, I'm not quite sure that I'd quite agree with that last point, because there is a general election coming up at the end of this year, and New Zealanders are going to pick a government which is either going to carry on in the direction, Mr Speaker, underlining Moody's and other commentators' assessment of New Zealand, or they're going to choose a government of a Labour Green that fundamentally thinks New Zealand is in a shocking space, is moving in the wrong direction, and is going to go in a completely different space. So I wouldn't actually agree with Moody's that our susceptibility to event risk is quite correctly described as low. I think we need to wait and see the verdict of the New Zealand people before we can make a realistic assessment of that. And then we have the ANZ Bank's interesting report also this week under the title Key Themes for 2014 Beyond the Economic Cycle. And what did the ANZ Bank put? How did they put it? Quote, "The economic upswing is one thing, but the New Zealand economy is also going through a material transition. We are moving from legacy to opportunity," unquote. Well, I think that's exactly right, and that's actually framing it extremely well, the whole strategy of this government, of dealing with a legacy of issues that were extremely taxing, the projection of deficits moving forward forever, massive debt if we didn't move, and then on the top of this came out of left field the global financial crisis and the disastrous Canterbury earthquake. So we've had to deal with that legacy. I think the ministers who've had the front responsibility for that have done an absolutely outstanding job, and exactly as the ANZ Bank put it, we are now moving from legacy to opportunity. And the whole of the Prime Minister's statement to the nation is about moving now to opportunity. It's about consolidating on the progress we've made over the course of the last 5.5 years. It's about growing on it. It's about developing new ideas, and we've got lots of new ideas, Mr. Speaker. We are so far removed from this caricature of a tired government as to be a ludicrous proposition, and we're ready to do that, but we will maintain the direction that New Zealand on, because we are convinced this is a good direction for our country. Now, let's look at the alternative Labour interpretation of where New Zealand sits. And this is a dramatically different view, and the danger here is that it provides the basis for dramatically different policy directions in the event that the New Zealand people do support their alternative view. So, we understand opposition politics. Of course we understand that. We understand that a little bit of poetic license is possible. But utter hogwash is likely to be swept down the political toilet. This is a policy structure based on a delusionary view of where New Zealand stands. It's trying to create an impression, let me put this in general terms, that New Zealand is going nowhere, that New Zealanders are losing hope. New Zealand is going backwards. This is, quote, a speculator's paradise was the phrase that the leader of the opposition used. It's trying to foment dissatisfaction. It's completely ignoring all the lessons, particularly from the last 3 years of their government. It's painting a picture of hopelessness. Now, is this even remotely close to the reality exemplified by those quotations I used from independent commentators? Mr. Speaker, I don't think it's even remotely in touch with where we are as a country. I mean, first of all, this proposition that you've got to be a dairy farmer or a homeowner in Christchurch receiving an insurance check to have any glimmer of hope. This is complete and utter nonsense, Mr. Speaker. In the last assessment of regional growth, as recently as November last year, every single one of the 14 regions of our country are moving forward, and 12 out of 14 are experiencing the strongest growth in over a decade.
That's right.
You know, what, just a few dairy farmers and people receiving insurance checks? Get real. Get in touch with where New Zealand is, would be my advice.
Yes, good advice.
Then, I won't go into it yet again. We've had yet another debate on this in question time of income inequality. The leader of the opposition said New Zealand has become more and more divided because the poor in the middle are struggling and the middle are struggling and the poor are going backwards. Well, that's just hogwash. Everybody would love to have some more money in their pocket, and we're trying to find policies, and I think we are, to deliver that result. But this idea of hopelessness and people losing confidence is complete nonsense. There is no evidence whatsoever of growing inequality in this country. Now, we have created 53,000 new jobs, Mr. Speaker. There was the accusation that wages will need to rise in line with prices. Wages are rising faster than prices, Mr. Speaker. And when we got on to structural economic policy, we got, again, a completely delusionary view of where New Zealand sits. The statement was made, we're cutting R&D for our most innovative industries. And examples were given about we need to stop exporting carcasses and process them here. And as Mr. Joyce pointed out, read the figures, look at the facts. You're out of touch with where New Zealand is. Only 2% of New Zealand carcasses are exported. The rest is all processed. Get in touch with where New Zealand is, not some half-forgotten memory of where we were 40 years ago. Get in touch to Labour is my advice. Get in touch. Cutting R&D, get in touch with the facts. The Minister of Economic Development has just announced that we spent $1.36 billion on innovation-related expenditure. This is the highest hurdle. And the member questions about where the private sector is. Get hold, I would recommend to her, get hold of one of the government's business growth strategy publications on R&D. And what you will find very early on from memory, it's about page 4 or 5, is a very intriguing graph which shows the share of private business expenditure on research and development in a range of OECD countries. And actually, in the last few years, the growth rate of New Zealand private sector R&D, which did not need some dodgy tax haven for tax accountants to try and milk their company reports, but needed sound policies. Actually, we're doing very, very well. Now, we understand the politics of this. They believe on the left the Green Party's eating their lunch, so they're lurching to the left. But, Mr. Speaker, I think one of our leaders in this House is out of touch, and it isn't the Prime Minister, it's Mr. Cunliffe.
I call Megan Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.